Aloha everyone and welcome to another Tinkers Academy video. I'm your host Kalmer, and in this video I'd like to share with you a bioelectromagnetic healing device called the Biophotonic Multi-Wave Oscillator. It's essentially what I would think that if there's ever going to be med bed technology, that this would be incorporated into that, because this is clearly the concept of healing in the 21st century. So let me kind of just explain what I'm talking about, because this is a phrase that I came up with because there's really no name for all of these different versions of the same thing. I mean, they all have their own name that they've called their product, all these different inventors that have come up with this. But essentially, though, I see it as a class of device, and it's biophotonic. It's also a multi-wave oscillator, thus the name I'm giving it. So this is my phrase, okay? So you're not going to find that out there in the public. But that's what this really is. It's essentially a multi-wave oscillator that's emitting light. So in this video, I'm going to just do a high-level overview of the different devices that are out on the market, how they sort of are working, and then get into the biological effects. And then obviously, if I can share with you whatever I can give you in terms of what does this do? In other words, number two would be, what's it supposed to do? Number three would be, what are the testimonials and the studies, if any, that basically validate or try to validate that the efficacy of these devices in terms of healing. And also, too, lastly, at the back of the video, it's going to be, if you want to experience one of these things, then, I'll go ahead and give you all the information you need so that if you wanted to try one, there's lots of different ways, not lots of different ways, but, there are ways to go ahead and try one of these things. So now, before I jump into the content, I do want to kind of explain that right now there's only, there's been several of these devices that have been created. A couple of the companies have just kind of disappeared off the, radar. But right now, of the 4 different devices that are that are actually out there for sale right now and for experiencing, you've got this biocharger device, and these are all the same technologies essentially. There are obviously major differences, and that's going to be discussed in another video. But there's a device called a biocharger. There's one called the Tesla Energy Lights. There's one called the Quantum Pulse, and then there's the Nova Light. Now, all of these devices have former names. These are all the current names, the most recent names given to the devices, but each one of these have other names that they've been given in the past, because as they evolve and get new features and so forth, there's different names to them all. So it does get really confusing trying to figure out which device is what and who did what and how it works and all of that. So this video is going to be, let's talk about these devices as at a high level, so that we can all kind of understand, hey, what are they, in general terms, executive summary, hey, let's, what do these things do, and what are people saying about them? So now, before I jump into that, I just have some disclaimers. I just want to make sure that all information contained in this video, that you understand, is for educational purposes only and should not be, construed as any type of medical advice. All right, so none of this stuff has ever been approved by the FDA or sanctioned by them, or even they haven't even been classified as medical devices. So none of that FDA stuff applies here. So just fair warning that this is just for educational purposes. And also too, I want to really make sure that you understand that I have no affiliation to any of the products here. So I'm not an affiliate. I'm not selling anything. This is just purely information and for education and just sharing. Now also too, that the information that is contained in this video is public. Okay, so I've just basically spent my entire Christmas break for the last 3 weeks researching these devices and every single different device and the story behind all of them and the technology, etc. So it's all public information sourced from the web archives, patent databases, existing vendors' websites, and also on YouTube. And I just want to convey that all of this material is presented under fair use. Now, the last thing I really want to kind of say is that, after 3 weeks of collecting information about these class of devices, and the content in this discussion really kind of comes down to 3 actual separate conversations that I think are really valuable to have about these devices in general. And so one of them is just, what are the claims that are being made? And that's this video. This video is about, hey, what are people What are the people who created these things say about them, and so forth. And so, what are the claims that have been made? And I think that's where I want to start this conversation. The next two discussions that I think are important to have, and these will be in future videos, is an actual review of the technology, kind of comparing the devices to each other, comparing them to the original multi-wave oscillator, and just there's a lot of technology involved, and especially a lot of technology that involves the, like what is the output of this machine and how is it working, and how is it doing some of the things that these claims are saying that they're doing. I mean, it's a fascinating area, and I wouldn't be able to have a short video if I tried to include that. So that's going to be a separate video. Of course, now there's the third piece here is the clinical validation. Now, none of the vendors who have created these, invented them, and put them out on the market, they've done, there are no NIH level, pseudo, sham, placebo type, control group type studies that have been done on any of these machines in terms of use on humans or pets, animals, and so forth. Everything is just simply a testimonial and claims by the vendors. And so there's been no third-party independent review except for there's been a couple of studies that have been done by third parties on one of the machines that was done quite a long time ago, and I'll share that in the video as well. But they're not like NIH level studies, so there's really been no third-party peer review, and I just want to stipulate that as well. It's part of that whole idea about don't construe it as medical advice. It hasn't fallen under any of that kind of stuff that you would expect. Like just say like other type of devices out there that are actually classified as medical devices. Other devices out there have like lots of peer-reviewed studies that show that they do what they do, like red light therapy, for example. So anyway, so I just wanted to make sure that you understand that there's three conversations here that I think are really important to kind of really truly understand this technology. And this first video you're watching right now is the claims made video. So let's jump right in. Now, what is a biophotonic multi-wave oscillator? And so there's a little history here I think that's important for everyone to understand, is that it is literally the next generation of an original multi-wave oscillator that was invented by a gentleman whose name is Georges Lakhovsky. And this patent came out in 1934, and his device that he put on the market, he commercialized his patent, and it's called the Kolsa. Now, the Kolsa kind of was put out there as basically part of the medical establishment. It was really big in Europe, and it was introduced in the early 40s to the American market, and of course World War II, totally shut that down, and the world changed for a few years, and so it just kind of disappeared after World War II. But the whole idea, though, is that Lakhovsky theorized, and he was the very first one to come up with this. Its predecessor is Nikola Tesla, who created these coils, and they kind of collaborated with each other, and he put together this healing machine because in his theory was really kind of simple if you think about it. Basically, he was thinking and theorizing that all of the cells of our body have a resonant frequency that we operate on. And if you think of like a piano or a guitar, and every single string or every single key of the device resonates at a specific tone, right? And then once it comes out of it comes out of tune eventually over usage and over time, and your guitar's out of tune, for example. So you have to have someone tune it, or you tune it yourself. You're using tuning forks, whatever. But the whole idea, though, is once that each one of those strings or each one of the keys on a piano becomes out of tune, then it doesn't sound right. It just doesn't play right. It's no longer at, pitch perfect, right? So there's the concept of, how a device or how a cell or a string or a key in the world of resonant frequencies and audio sound, there's the idea of pitch perfect. What does it mean to be pitch perfect? And that means it's in its natural state and it's resonating perfectly and is operating exactly like how, the universe created it to be, and operate, right? But once it becomes out of tune, then Lakhovsky's idea was, and his theory was, if we could find a way to tune your cells back to its natural, healthy, basically perfect pitch state, then in that perfect pitch state, what is the, environment? Well, the environment of a perfect pitch resonating cell, and there's trillions of cells in each one of us, and there's all sorts of different kinds of cells, from blood cells to cells that make up your kidneys and liver and brain, and I mean, there's so many different cells, right? And there's trillions of them. And so, what would happen if you could create a device that would tune the human body, just like you would tune a guitar or tune a piano or a cello or so forth, right? And so that's what he set out to do. And so he kind of basically was like, his idea was, I can't figure out, and there's no way back in the, turn of the century, literally 100 years ago, there was no way for Lakhovsky to find out what was the exact frequency of every single type of cell, right? And so what he did was he kind of took the shotgun approach, and he created a pulse modulator. That's what this device is. It's the power supply, and it also puts out a pulse, okay, an oscillating pulse that's using kind of like old school technology, using something called a spark gap, which is like two little metal rods that are a distance apart. You run high current through the rods, and it creates a little arc, a little lightning bolt between the two of them, and that little lightning bolt is what pulses, right? It just keeps it, like kind of like that. And then as that really, and then it also uses a step up process where the voltage is stepped up from coming out of the wall. As you know, our in America, the voltage coming out of your wall is 110 volts. In Europe, it's 220, but it's not really high. I mean, not really high in the world of high voltage, right? And so it takes that 110 volts and it steps it up to a little over 50,000 to 600,000 volts are coming out of this machine, and it's coming out at a pulse because of the spark gap ran through the Tesla coils. And then what creates the frequency are these incredible antennas that he came up with, which are essentially based on the golden mean. And so he created these copper antennas and he connected them to these coils. And then what would happen is if you sat in between these coils, you would experience this pulse, high voltage pulsing, electrical field that was resonating every single frequency that was the entire scale, because the frequencies were generated by the electricity, the arcing of the electricity as it passed through these antennas. Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm trying to just explain this. This is my elevator explanation of what a multi-wave oscillator does. And that's where you would get this pulsed electromagnetic frequency that was essentially a device that would tune the human body back to pitch perfect. And so what happened was it actually worked. And so now I did an entire video about George Lakhovsky's multi-wave oscillator, link in the video description below, where it talks in great detail about this machine, and especially the biological effects that they discovered when they started using it in medical clinics throughout Europe, and when they brought it to America. And what it did was it resolved whatever issue people had. It would actually do what Lakhovsky theorized it would do. Once you get tuned like a guitar, you play at perfect pitch, and a perfect pitch cell does not have any disease or anything wrong with it. So keep that in mind. So it's kind of like, and he invented this 100 years ago. So since the 30s, and especially after the 40s, when World War II kind of just changed the world, this machine kind of went into hiding. And so then it kind of just disappeared off the radar in terms of like healing modalities and being used in medical clinics and so forth. It just literally disappeared after World War II. But the story goes, now what happened was this, and it all is accredited to a guy named James Gerard, who is one of the founders, or who is the founder of the biocharger model. It's a company and it's also a device. So he came up with, now James Gerard in the late 80s started tinkering around, saying, hey, about with the Lakhovsky multi-wave oscillator as his inspiration, and he created something called the biocharger. And so now I'm classifying this multi-wave oscillator as a biophotonic MWO, multi-wave oscillator, because of the fact that instead of these two rings creating the frequencies, he has the same idea where the base unit is your pulse modulator, and then using spark. Now, the original ones that he created used a spark gap. It created that high intensity, high voltage. And when it came up here, though, this section up here is the antenna. And the antenna, instead of using copper coils, he decided to use what we would call a spectrum tube that's filled with different types of gases. And essentially, he used the noble gases. There's six of the noble gases that he uses in his machine to simulate the atmospheric conditions of our planet. And so in his way of approaching it, once you pulse that electrical current or that electrical voltage through these spectrum tubes, then the output, instead of it being this really high charged electrical field with frequency, the up and down scale of the frequency constantly pulsing and modulating and oscillating, then what this device would do is the same thing. That's the theory, but instead it would use light. It would use photons and the electrical field as the carrier wave to then pulse those biophotons through you, and then the gases would be what would create the different frequencies, and it would also be up and down the scale. And so it's just a different way to approach the same goal, which is creating a healing machine that would tune the body back to pitch perfect. And so this device was created in 1988. Now, since then, this device has been on the market. The biocharger was the first one by James Gerard, who's now formed a company called Applied Technologies. And so now the patents that have been put out there, now if you search the patent database, I found essentially 4 patents based that would kind of wrap around the idea of what I've described to you. Now, the first one, as I mentioned, was George Lakhovsky, and he filed a patent in France, and it basically was filed on June 12, 1934. So since then, when we're talking about, and that was the original Lakhovsky, so we call that the Lakhovsky multi-wave oscillator. Now, for these other devices that I'm calling the biophotonic multi-wave oscillator, the patents came out. There was a patent that came out by a gentleman called Gene Coons, who is the founder and inventor of the device. The original device name was called the Vibe Machine. It's now called Quantum Pulse, okay? And so this Quantum Pulse device, he filed 2 patents on it, one in August 23rd of 2005, and he filed another one September 1st, 2009. So it's kind of odd because when you look at the 4th patent on the multi-wave oscillator, it actually was filed by James Gerard, which is also Applied Technologies, and he filed a patent on for the biocharger. But he filed it just this last year, March 30, 2003. So, the chronology of the development of the device goes from Lakhovsky to Gerard, but it's interesting. I find it's just a weird thing where the chronology of the patent filings actually skipped Gerard, and actually Gene kind of slid in there and got his patents filed. But then James actually filed in 2003. So these are the different patents that exist. And now when you read the different patents, I think one of the it's kind of like the best one I could find to kind of explain the technology, and I'm only going to do this at a super high level. I don't, because this is not a technology discussion. This is like the executive summary, but I do want to explain. So I'm going to take, I think when I read all of these, I think this one right here, the patent number 7583172, kind of has a description in the patent that I think is probably the closest thing to keeping it in layman's terms and simplicity as to like what does this really what does this do from a technology standpoint. So this is a snapshot out of that patent, and let me just kind of read to you while I talk about, or let me just read you the description in the patent. So the description of what this device is called a multi-frequency electromagnetic field generator. Okay, that's the name of the patent. And what it is, it's disclosed as a multi-frequency electromagnetic field generator that is capable of generating electromagnetic flux fields that are projected at a distance from the device. Radial fields, horizontal fields, and spiral fields are generated by the electromagnetic field generator and are projected at a distance from the device. A wide range of frequencies is generated as a result of the fast rise time pulses produced by the device. The geometry and structure of the device cause the electromagnetic fields to encircle the device and be collected at the far end of the device by the antenna. An inner coil antenna that is centrally disposed in the device receives electromagnetic waves that are transformed into a current that is applied to an inner coil. The inner coil produces a strong electromagnetic field that extends outwardly in a horizontal direction that increases the projected horizontal distance of the electromagnetic field. Yeah, Okay, so that's layman terms. But the point that I want to make by reading that is that it's not just, oh, let's just pump out some electricity and create a bubble field. No, the way that these things are designed is they are spinning and creating longitudinal waves of electricity. It's not just a bubble, like any other type of electrical device is essentially just it's radiated outwards and it's kind of like a bubble. If you were to think of it a field, but this one is spinning the electricity. So like essentially the power is coming out of the box, out of the spark gap, oscillating circuit, and then this high voltage pulsed electricity is then coming through the coil, and because of the way that it's designed, it's spinning it. It's spinning that field in multiple directions, and then when it hits this very top section here, this little thing here, which I can kind of show you like here on the biocharger, this top coil is called a Mobius coil. And there's some discussion out there that's like, what kind of field is created when you wrap wire like that? And so what's really happening is it creates a longitudinal field, and it also, and some people actually think it creates an energy vortex when you pump, electricity through one of these fields. So what you've got essentially is an electromagnetic field that's just twisting and turning and spinning, and then it's projecting frequencies into that field, and that's what makes this really kind of unique. It's way different than if you were to just walk up to a power line and experience electrical fields, right? From an EMF standpoint. And that's the point, is because when you basically experience high voltage in this type of an electromagnetic environment, it is found to be good for you, as opposed to walking up to a power line, which is found to be bad for you. So because of the way that this works, it's actually quite different, and very different in terms of like, EMF, like what's good EMF and what's bad EMF. Well, this is apparently good EMF. So now this is a copy on the right side here of the actual antenna. There's 12 different tubes filled with different gases in the antenna, and then on top of this stands the Mobius coil. Okay, it's not pictured here in this diagram, but it's over here, right here, if you look at this little tiny thing. Now, I went and took a look at what types of gases are being used. I couldn't get any specifications on the Vibe machine itself, but I do have a Novolite. I have like one of these. This is the one I have right here on the right. It's the Novolite. As part of the research for this video, I discovered a really great deal on one of these. It's a used one because the company is now defunct. But I just, the stars lined up for me, and I was able to go ahead and get one of these things. So I found a used one on eBay, and just to kind of convey my dedication to my level of interest and just absolutely, I'm just fascinated by bioelectrical magnetics in general. But I found this thing on eBay, and it was pickup only. I drove during the Christmas break. I took 3 days, packed up the dogs, and I drove from my home in Missouri all the way to Colorado to pick it up. It was 1,500 miles over 3 days to go ahead and acquire this device, and now it's set up in my living room and I'm using it. So it was quite an adventure, as part of making this video in terms of, I wanted to get one. After I did all this research, I'm like, I want to get one really badly, and so I did. But anyway, so what I'm trying to say is that when I was able to contact the folks at Biocharger, and by the way, those guys are so friendly and so helpful. And so I contacted the Biocharger folks, and I'm like, hey, what's in those? What are the gases that you guys are using? And so they basically said, hey, we're using 6 of the 8 noble gases: argon, helium, krypton, mercury, neon, and xenon. And so they use, now there's 12 tubes, right? So there's 2 of each one of these gases in the biocharger. Okay, now my Novolite that I got, now that one has these 6 different noble gases, but it also contains carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and oxygen. So I've got like 6 plus 3, I got 9 different gases in the Novolite. And yeah, so what are the other 3? And I believe, and I can't confirm this because there's nobody around to explain it to me, but I believe the other 3 are just duplicates of some of these gases, and I'm trying to figure that out right now. But it's just one of my things about the whole technology review is like I've got a lot of work to do in the future to really understand, like, does this thing do what it says it's going to do? Does it meet, and what are exactly is the field sizes and things like that. To give you an example, the Vibe machine says the field is 6 to 8 feet. So the recommended user is supposed to sit like 3 feet close to it, so that you're closest to the field, so you're getting the bulk of the frequencies and so forth. So field sizes, pulse rates, how many watts it's pulling, all that stuff will be in the next video. But that's what the different gases that are being used. Now, the claim, obviously, right, is that when you pass high voltage electricity through these gases, it's going to create that frequency spread that Lakhovsky discovered coming through actual copper coils, but instead they'll be coming through these gases. And that's sort of how that's sort of in a nutshell how it works. So let me kind of give you a little demo. The first note, I took 2 different clips. The first one is the Nova light that I acquired a couple of weeks ago from that guy in Colorado. And shout out to you, because I made a new friend. It was fun to meet somebody who's excited about bioelectromagnetics as I am. I've been really passionate about this for like 20 years, and so is he. So so it was great to meet someone who's like a part of the tribe. So anyway, so I got my Nova light, and so there's a clip I'm about to show you to kind of demo what these things look like when they're turned on. The first one is the Novolite 3000 that I own, and the second one is the actual biocharger that is, that was created by James Gerard, and the individual in the video is Luke Story, and they did a video together about the biocharger. It's a great video, link in the video description, where he demonstrates how the biocharger looks and sounds while it's turned on. So let me go ahead and just start that for you. Okay, well, let's see if I can get there we go. And here we go. This is the Novolite 3000. That's the timer. It goes up to 4 minutes. The typical session is 3 seconds. And you stand 3 feet, or you actually sit or stand 3 feet from the device. If you get too close to this thing, it will zap you. Now, all of those different colors are the different gases. And if you get really close to that Mobius coil, and if you look close enough, you'll see that there's arcs coming off of that Mobius coil. Here's the biocharger and Luke's Story. Now, you'll notice that biocharger was smart enough to put a case around the antenna so you don't zap yourself. And they also encased the Mobius coil for probably the same reason. But if you look at the very top right here, there's a little rod that comes out of the top that actually discharges the basically the arcing. And now I do want to point out that while this thing is running, because it's arcing, there's little lightning bolts coming off of it. It is creating negative ions and it's creating ozone. But when you run it for like 3 minutes or something like that, the ozone accumulation is not so heavy. But I'm not sure how the ozone accumulation around a biocharger is. I don't have one. I haven't been able to. I haven't experienced one just quite yet. But that's what these devices do look like. That's what they look like and sound like. And the other thing to know about them is, they're loud. they're not quiet machines, and they do produce a smell. So in a nutshell, okay, let's talk about what's really happening here from a biological effect standpoint. So what I want to say is, here's an example of the biocharger. And so one of the first things I want to say is what's coming out of this machine and how it affects you biologically is the first thing, again, is the pulse electromagnetic frequency, the PEMF. Now, Lakhovsky talked about using a broad bandwidth so that the cells with very weak vibrations, when placed in the field of multiple vibrations, find their own frequency and start again to oscillate normally through the phenomenon of resonance, unquote. And that's kind of what's going on. And so that's kind of what's creating this healing magic. Now, the other thing too about these high voltage, it's healthy high voltage. Now, one of the things about high voltage EMF exposure, it is extremely beneficial, like a quick cold shower when you wake up, whereas long-term exposure stimulates the body's immune system too much. So short-term high voltage therapy increases the transmembrane potential, TMP, enhances the sodium potassium pump for your cells to communicate and to essentially detox, and also increases ATP production, so that boosts your energy. energy. It kills pathogens, that's what's key here, and infections, so that's like it's doing a blood electrification action at the same time, and overall improves cell metabolism and energy levels. And I can testify to that. Just to let you know, I've been using my Novolite for a week now. I use it 3 minutes a day, and then one of the first things I realized not to do is don't do this at night, because every single time I use it after 6, I'm only sleeping 2 to 3 hours at night. I just automatically wake up and I'm wide awake, full of energy, like I just had a full night's sleep. It's bizarre. So I'm learning now just to turn that, only use that thing in the morning, because it's really quite disruptive to my circadian rhythm. Now, the other thing that's going on is the biophotons, and that's what this key thing here is, light. And that's what makes this device so unique and different than the Lakhovsky multi-wave oscillator, again, that used coils. So now, in terms of biophotons, or light, and that's what makes this so special, is that your body can be thought of as a coherent biophotonic field of energy and information. And when this field starts to break down, the body becomes sick and weak, right? So now biophotons, like enzymes, provide the activation energy needed for biochemical reactions to take place in your body. The gas tube emission spectra from the tubes provides a richer and more precise array of laser-like and highly ordered photons that strengthen and energize your body's natural field. All right, so that's kind of the whole description of what biophotons do, and and one of the other things, the esoteric idea of what also biophotons and how they're important to us is that if you talk to energy workers, we are considered beings of light, and there's this really interesting thing about light that I find that is equally as interesting about water, which kind of folds into the concepts of reality and what we perceive as reality. And I think that in the future, like again, as I first stated, if there's ever going to be med-bed technology, it's going to have a lot to do with manipulating light and water, because we are water and we are light, as physical beings, okay? Then the last thing, again, is those frequencies and those harmonics that are coming out of that pulsed electromagnetic, pulse that's coming out to the frequencies. And there's that one other thing that's happening too, and I just kind of want to point out, this thing pumps out ozone, right? So you're smelling it, but at the same time, though, it's pumping out negative ions. And if you ever look into negative ions, it's the reason that negative ions are found in nature, and especially like after a storm, after or close to any kind of moving water. And it's like, why are people so attracted to going to the beach? Well, that's because the beach environment is full of negative ions, and negative ions are super healthy for us. It's basically nature's gift to us in the form of free electrons, and electrons are the opposite of the things that all causes problems, right? So that's that's why this device and this class of devices are pumping out so much wonderful stuff that it's really quite amazing in terms of what it's actually producing. So now how you use it, again, basically you can sit there and you can expose yourself just by yourself, but you also can do group, this thing is so strong that you can have up to 6 people surrounding the machine. Now the biocharger is recommended to use it for 12 to 15. As I mentioned, the Novolite and the Vibe machine, i.e. the Quantum Pulse, you use it for 3 minutes at a time. So devices vary in terms of usage and user guides, but the whole idea though is you can expose yourself individually or in groups for a period of time. Okay, so that's kind of how the device works, how it's designed, and what it produces. Now let's talk about the testimonials. Now this is the actual, what have people experienced, and what have they, what are the manufacturers saying about, hey, what happens when you use this thing? Well, I want to first start off with, now this is Gene Kuntz. He's the inventor of the Vibe machine, which is now called, again, the Quantum Pulse machine. And his story is really kind of unique in the group of gentlemen that put together these devices post Lakhovsky, because Gene created a Vibe machine and he kind of ran afoul of the FDA. So, this is like he gave a lecture in 2005, but by 2007, the FDA kind of got on his okole about the claims he was making through his testimonials he was giving that were published on his website. So what happened was, after the FDA basically got on him about what he was claiming to have done, they shut him down. And so after 2007, the original Vibe Machine website was gone. He went kind of underground and disappeared for a while because, he just completely just basically did the big no-no. You should not, this is, we all know, right? It's very dangerous to cure cancer. As an example. And so, so he just ran afoul of the authorities that protect the, the pharmaceutical industry, and the medical establishment. And so he disappeared, and he earned the Star Award of the alternative medicine world, which is he got his own page on Quackwatch. And here's the thing, nothing had to do with the fact that anyone got injured or that they went to this thing and there was no complaints from anyone who had exposed themselves to this device. None of the people using it, were the reason. It was simply because he was basically saying things that, the medical establishment does not want him to say. And so he disappeared, but he came back, and that's where the quantum pulse, device, i.e., it's essentially the Vibe Machine, but it's now called a quantum pulse. It's no longer for sale. You can't just go and buy the device from him. But if you contact them directly, yeah, you can go get one. But now it's more of instead of selling a device to practitioners and the public, now it's more like, hey, the website that he's got up is like, hey, this is this great technology, extremely vague, very, not a lot of detail for obvious reasons after what happened. But it's basically like, here's all the people that offer sessions. And so now it's more like go to that website to find people who have the device so you can go and get an experience from it. In the old days when the Vibe Machine was actually out there, their practitioners, their sales were about 60% of their sales went to practitioners. Everyone from chiropractors to veterinarians were using these machines. 40% of their sales went to the general public for personal use. And so that 60%, they were basically called Vibe centers, and people would go to the Vibe centers and take treatments off of the Vibe Machine. And so that same concept's still in play now. Now it's called the quantum pulse. You go find someone who has a quantum pulse, they're providing sessions for it, and you can go to their website and find someone who's doing that in your state or in your area, So that's kind of how that evolved. But I can tell you that if you look at anybody else's websites, or you try to get any information about, hey, what does this thing do? What are people saying about it? It's completely scrubbed off the web now, and the only place it lives is in the Internet Archives on the old web, on the old site. But it's also in this one video that he did. He did a lecture in 2005. It is on YouTube, and this is where I got this information, which is where he was basically explaining, hey, this is what people are saying. So let me run through with you what people had experienced, and this is directly from Gene Coons. These are the testimonials of people who had used the Vibe Machine back in the day. So one of the first things was it just dissolves calcium buildup in your bones, in your body. There's a patient who had breast cancer tumors. That person used the device for 3.5 minutes per day for 30 days, and then after another 30 days, the cancer was gone. Another individual had brain cancer, and they used the device for 2 minutes a day for 5 days. Cancer gone. They were told that they had 2 months to live, and they lived a year past that point. So it's not the panacea, but they lived a year past that point. And he didn't explain what happened. Individuals reporting increase in energy. Individuals reporting that they were on insulin for 10 years. They used the Vibe Machine daily for 3 months, and they no longer needed to use insulin, and they weren't using it anymore. Another individual is taking 17 different pharmaceutical products a day. They used the machine for 3 months, and they completely came off pharmaceuticals 100%. This individual is on oxygen. They used the device for 4 months daily, and they came off oxygen, no longer needed it. He also reported that people had said that they had seen improvements and or the disappearance of everything from multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, lupus, osteoarthritis, and improvements in eyesight. Now, he goes on in his video to say that people had great improvements in cataracts and eye floaters, tendonitis, migraines, especially migraines. It just eliminates them. Pain management, reduces reliance on pharmaceuticals, improvements in blood pressure, improvements in blood sugar. And also they had one autistic child use the machine after 4 or 5 sessions, and the autistic child started talking and stuff like that, improved. It showed a 40% reduction time for wound healing. It was improved the recovery time for stroke victims. Everyone who used it, their mood improved. There was this real interesting side effect, where anyone who had depression, they popped right out of depression being exposed to the Vibe machine. And then for pets, he actually has, I believe in one of his videos, he actually has a picture of a dog with a huge tumor on it. Now the dog used had the dog use the Vibe machine for 2 minutes per day for 2 weeks, and you can see the picture where the actual tumor has shrunk considerably. And so it's pretty interesting. Now, unfortunately, you can't find this information anywhere else anymore. Like I said, it's been scrubbed, but this is what he got him in trouble with the FDA. And so that's kind of what the Vibe machine is known to have done back in the day. And so now the other thing too, and like I did mention earlier, is that there were clinical studies. So if you go back into web archives and you find his old website that no longer exists today, then he had actually posted 3 that he was actually in the process of doing clinical studies on his device, because just like any other inventor, you want to back up your claims. And so he'd done and commissioned 3 different studies on that old website. And so luckily there's 2 of them are still available. There's this 3rd one on depression that's just not available anymore. I couldn't get a hold of it. It's not in the public record. But the one on pilot that he did a pilot study on anti-aging conducted at the Holos University by Dr. Ginger Bowler and Dr. Norman Shealy back in December of 2005. Now, I'm not sure if you're in the alt medicine world, you might know who Dr. Shealy is. He's very prominent. I've followed him for years and years, followed his work. And so when I saw his name, I was like, oh, this is legit. So now this study, and they're just write-ups too. They're not even like published peer review studies. They're just like a write-up. And so in that write-up of the pilot study on anti-aging, basically they tested, I think, 14 individuals who took questionnaires and documented all of the things that they were having trouble with. It's kind of like that little questionnaire you get when you show up at your doctor's. If you haven't been around for a long time, they got this big questionnaire, and you check box all the things that are troubling you. You have problems with high blood pressure or whatever. And so they took those. And so out of the number of, there was like 100 plus number of total issues that these 14 people had, and then they had them use the Vibe machine for a while, and then they had them redo the study, redo the questionnaire. And then they had shown that after using the Vibe machine, that there was a reduction of 53% in the number of problems that people were reporting as having issues with. So it showed a 53% reduction, right, in problematic issues that people had by using the Vibe machine. So I thought very interesting, because Norman Shealy is a very reputable scientist. Now, there was also another study that's on that old website called Clinical Study on Direct Correlations Between Psychotronic and Biochemical Measures of Human DNA. Now, that's just like, it's literally 2 paragraphs, and I honestly don't understand it. It's just way past my pay grade. It talks about DNA unwinding and blah, blah, blah. So I can't tell if it's good or bad. There's no clear abstract or conclusions. So I don't know what this whole study was about, but it is out there on that old website. Link in the video description below. And again, there was that depression study. Now, we know that the depression study, even though it's unavailable, we know by Gene Kuntz's testimony in his video that it did improve mood and people were walking away with depression cured. So that was kind of the interesting thing that I found in terms of like, hey, what are the testimonials? What are the clinical studies on this device? And so that's kind of that. So, when you read all of that, you can't help but go, wow, that's pretty wild. I mean, they're just claims. They haven't been, quote, validated, but it's pretty amazing. And so I do want to add on one last thing, was that I've been discussing this video that I'm trying to make, or that I've been working on for 3 weeks, in our Telegram chat group. And, with some of the people in there that are really, really versed on multi-wave oscillators. And one person jumped in like 2 nights ago and said, hey, I have the biocharger. And I did this, this and this with me and then my son. And the testimony from that individual that was posted in Telegram was straight on par with all of these incredible claims made by Gene Kuntz. So when she came in and said, or he, I'm sorry, made that claim of like, hey, I have a biocharger and this is what it did for us, meaning I used a biophotonic multi-wave oscillator, and it was beyond remarkable, her personal testimony of somebody that I've kind of known about. They've been hanging around Telegram with us for quite a while. And so this was like, wow, really? That is so cool. So there's a lot of, there's smoke, there's fire, and so I'm just feeling really positive about like, hey, some of these claims, they might be true. So hopefully we'll be able to get a lot more definitive about the specifics of what's happening when you use these things. But I'm telling you that the stories from people who are using it are beyond amazing. Again, this is med technology. I mean, this is magic, kind of thing. And, obviously it's quantum healing too. So we'll get into that in that other video. So that's the case studies and the clinical studies. And the last thing I want to kind of share with you are some notes about these machines before I get into the last piece of the video. And that's that, when you hear Gene Kuntz talk about the Vibe machine, again, now called Quantum Pulse, he basically wanted to make sure everyone was really clear. And so I really appreciate that this guy said these things about his own device, when is that, hey, it does not work on everyone, all right? So here, let's level set. It's not the magical miracle, cure. And so he, quantified that his device had incredible results, but it didn't work on everybody, but it helps the majority of people who used it. Now, some people, they actually felt slight tingling in their problem areas when exposed to the machine. And then others that he had kind of kept in touch with, really kind of over time, he had discovered that, you've got to improve your environmental situation for the results to remain. And so by that, and it's typical with any other type of treatment modality, is that, if you're an alcoholic and you go to rehab and you're cured, well, you need to not keep, you need to improve your environmental situation. In other words, don't go back to drinking. Or if you're eating toxic food all the time and you've got IBS and all these gut problems, and then you go to a homeopath and they fix your gut microbiome and you're doing great, you can't go back to eating the poison food, right? So that's just a clear reminder to everyone that, hey, all of these things are just amazing devices, amazing healing modalities, but if you don't change your environment, the results will not remain for no matter what you do. You need, if you want it to be lasting, you need to change your environment. And lastly, I think the key thing here is, as of 2005, according to Gene Kuntz, 50,000 people, roughly, had used the Vibe machine. And there had been not one of 50,000 people. Now, this is not just him. It's all of the other Vibe centers, right? Remember the Vibe centers, right? So of all of the different users, of 50,000 people as of 2005, no reported adverse side effects. Nobody had a problem with it. Not one complaint. Out of 50,000 users, and that was his claim. Pretty amazing, okay? Now, if you look at, if you listen to there's a really great Luke Story podcast with James Gerard and his two partners. I believe it's Jim Law and Colin Besser. I'm sorry if I got it wrong. Of Applied Technology, which is also the biocharger NG. NG stands for Next Generation. It's the most recent model. I believe it's like Model 3 right now. But if you listen to that video, link in the video description, then one of the things that really is amazing about what James Gerard has done is now all of these other devices out there on the market. So I'm going to go back to this picture here. There's 4 devices currently on the market. Only 2 of them are still out there. The companies exist and the companies are selling. The other 2 are out there, but you're only ever going to find a used version. Okay, so now James Gerard, basically in that video with Luke Story, talks about how the 3rd generation of the biocharger has switched from using spark gap technology and is now using solid state technology. So it's using electronics to simulate that spark gap, that sparking, that pulse rate. And so because they're using electronics, it's software controlled. And so it's really super high tech. So not only was he the inventor of the concept of the biophotonic multi-wave oscillator, he's now taken it to another level by switching over to solid state technology, but that's controlled by software. And his most recent version of the biocharger NG, which just came out, I believe, recently within the last couple of years, now also has the ability to download into it frequency sets, which they call recipes, which is now then combining the concept of if you go into the world of Raymond Royal Rife, Okay, I don't want to get this is not a Rife machine, but you get into that world where you start using specific frequencies. Let's say you've got issues with kidneys, you've got issues with IBS, you've got issues with, whatever your problem might be. You can actually go out and get frequency sets. It's kind of been this science that's been going on for 100 years where people have kind of figured out, hey, if you play these 5 frequencies, then it will improve X. And so then he's got this entire database now on a cloud, and that the biocharger actually connects to the Wi-Fi and connects to the cloud, and you can download these frequency sets. Again, they call them recipes, and you can play specific recipes, right, through your machine, so that not only is it hitting the entire, bandwidth from A to B, A to Z, right? It's also playing those specific frequency sets for specific problems. So that's really what this whole amazing thing about the biocharger is. It's really taken it to another level now. They call, the next generation. And that's what's really amazing about, the technology after I, reviewed all of it. So, so it is pretty cool, and, the price reflects that. So now here you go. What a lot of people, I think, are, my first question about everything, and I'm sorry I put it at the end, but, God, I got to keep you watching the video. Anyway, but hey, if you want to experience one of these things, and I know I did because I ran out and drove for 3 days with my dogs in the truck across Kansas, which is probably the most boring drive you could ever make in America. And I went and picked up my Novolite. But this is how if you wanted to go out and say, hey, I want to try this thing, this sounds cool, then you can, first of all, you can book a session. So now there are, again, if you go to the Quantum Pulse, all the video, all these links, every single thing I'm mentioning, I've got a link in my video description so that you can do your own research. But you can go to the Quantum Pulse website. You can find a Vibe Center or a practitioner who has a Quantum Pulse, i.e. Vibe machine, and you can, in your area, and you can go and book a session with them. Now the biocharger has the same thing. They also have all these different places that are using it, all these different wellness centers, and you can go book a session. One thing too that's interesting is that I found out that if you are interested in buying a biocharger, then the friendly folks at the biocharger will be more than happy to get you set up with one of those folks and have you try it for free. So that might be another way to approach it, because I was offered, yeah, you want to try one of these things? Because I am interested in getting a biocharger. And so you can go book a session through Biocharger and find a local biocharger person in your area. And then also too, the Tesla energy lights are still out there being used in wellness centers. So when I did a Google search on Tesla energy lights, I did find a Tesla energy lights wellness center. I don't recall what state it's in, but I'm sure if there's one, there's probably more. But you also can find a Tesla energy lights bio center or wellness center to actually go and book a session. So if you don't want to buy one of these things, you just want to try it out, there's 3 places where you can go and try to find, give it a try, give it a demo. Now, if you're like me and you just want to purchase one because you're me, then there's basically the 4 of them. There's all 4 of them are still available out there. You can go buy one. So now the Quantum Pulse, I reached out to the Quantum Pulse folks and said, hey, if I wanted to buy one, what would it cost? Well, brand new, they're selling them for $12,800, and if they have a used one on hand, they'll sell it to you for $9,700. Okay, so you can go ahead and if you wanted to buy one, you could reach out to Quantum Pulse, and these are for sale today because they sell them new. Now the biocharger new, it's $16,990, so it's like really expensive. And it's because it's the fanciest one. It's got the most most different features and all that extra stuff. So brand new, it's $16,990. That's what this one is right here on the left. I'm sorry, on the right. But if you can find one used, there is one right now. This is January 6, 2024. There is actually on eBay right now, there's a used one someone's selling for $14,000 on eBay. Now, I want to point out, though, that, you can save a couple grand. But here's the idea, though. There's asterisks right there on Biocharger. Because it's run by software, if you buy one brand new, and this is according to the Biocharger people, if you buy a Biocharger brand new, then you've got 2 years for free of access to the cloud database to get, software upgrades, because it's like any other software, right? It's always going to need annual maintenance and upgrades and patches and, that crap, right? But also, too, you want access to the recipe database. The machine only holds 40 recipes, okay? So if you wanted to swap them in and out, you wanted to get different ones and try different ones, you're going to want to have access to that database. So after 2 years, okay, then if you wanted to have a continued software subscription to the recipe database, it's going to be $598 per year after the first 2 years. So the BioCharger is one of those devices where you buy it, it's really expensive, and it's still going to cost you $600 a year after the 2 years, every year after year. So that is one of probably, it's a drawback from a financial perspective. So if you're committed to this thing, just be aware it's going to cost you, and it's going to have an ongoing cost. So the total cost of ownership is going to be whatever, however long you own it. So it does go up in price, because of that. Now the Novolite, they're selling those used right now on eBay. There's 1 or 2 of them for sale, and they're averaging about $5,000 each. Now I was so lucky that the seller that I bought mine from, they posted their ad on eBay for like $39.50, and I was like, I snagged it immediately, even knowing that I had to drive to go get it. And then after, but here's the funny part. After I included from $39.50, once you add on the taxes and the cost of the trip and the gas alone, it ended up being around $5,000. So there, this is the cost of a used Novolite. You can get one on eBay for $5,000. That's kind of where I got mine. Now the Tesla Energy Lights, there is actually one right now on eBay for sale. It's also on sale for $5,000. So that seems to be the the kind of like the used price for these devices. Around $5,000 on eBay from personal people who own these things. Now, I also want to point out, too, that, the reason I bought a Novolite is because I can't afford a BioCharger. Certainly can't afford a brand new Vibe machine. So, it's kind of like, in my mind, it's like, hey, it's a good place to start if you just kind of want to tinker around. You want one that, A, that works, and B, you want to tinker around with it. It's kind of a good entry price if you just want to start out somewhere in trying to experience one of these biophotonic multi-wave oscillators yourself. Okay, so other than that, hey, you know what? I just want to say thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate, the friendly comments and just the engagement of this type of information. This is my passion. Bioelectrical magnetic healing devices and also quantum healing is really where I just that's my thing. Okay, so now if you want to learn more, again, all of the links are in the video description, so you can go ahead and kind of just check out all of that. Plus, I also found interviews of each one of the different inventors, and and I've mentioned a lot about the Vibe machine and about BioCharger, and I really don't want to leave out the fact that the Novolite, there's only like one short little 3-minute video about from the maker of that one. That individual just sold machines and went to shows to sell them, had a website, but they didn't have any type of YouTube channel or anything that really kind of took it, took the information to the next level. But I want to point out one thing, that for the Tesla Energy Lights, and the BioCharger, they both have really, really deep, content-rich YouTube channels. And so now the BioCharger really kind of goes the modern way of just, lots of user testimonials, lots of user information, all that tutorials and all that stuff, product information on their YouTube channel. But if you go to the Tesla Energy Lights YouTube channel, they went and spent a lot of time trying to understand, how these devices worked and why they worked. Instead, they've interviewed physicists. And actually, one of the things that I found incredibly remarkable about the Tesla Energy Lights, and that's this guy right here, right, is that there's a testimonial video on their YouTube channel by Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt of the Sophia Health Institute. Now, if any of you are in that alternate space like I am, you recognize the name of Dr. Norman Shealy, but you'll also recognize Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt as a really reputable, thought leader in the world of alternative health. And he actually has one at the Sophia Health Institute, and he uses it in his practice, which I found shocking and amazing and cool. And I'm like, wow. So I want to make sure that the Tesla Energy Lights product or its device is right up there with the other three in terms of just being an amazing biophotonic multi-wave oscillator. So anyway, learning more, lots of video links in the video description. Also, too, if you like this type of content, this is my thing. Again, I'm totally into bioelectromagnetic healing devices is really my passion. I'm just curious, and I've been studying this for 20 years, and also quantum healing. And you can find all my work on the Tinkers Academy. Just type in tinkers.academy in your URL window, and it goes over to my blog. And of course, I've got my YouTube channel. And if you like this kind of content, hey, you know what? I welcome you to subscribe to my channel, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And just if you want to see more content, I do plan on really kind of refocusing. I've been spending a long time on quantum healing for a while now, and I really kind of want to get back into bioelectrical magnetics this year for 2024. So there'll be a lot more content like this coming out. Anyway, again, hey man, thanks for watching. Really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed this content and have a great day. Aloha.